is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. The Prime Ministers of Japan and Australia tighten their Indo-Pacific partnership, locking in deals on energy, defense and critical minerals, with China and Middle East tensions driving the agenda. Now, Iran warns American forces to stay out of the Hormuz Strait or face attack. Well, that's after President Donald Trump says that the U.S. will begin escorting ships through the waterway as he reviews Tehran's new peace plan. And Washington backs William Lai's surprise visit to Eswatini, calling Taiwan a trusted partner. Beijing warning the island poses a big risk to U.S.-China ties ahead of an expected summit between both presidents. Also, preparations for the failed martial law bid in South Korea may have started months before troops moved in December 2024, raising the stakes for ousted leader Yoon Suk-yeol. A rare sports exchange between war-divided rivals. A North Korean women's football team prepares to head south for a semi-final this month. We look at the significance behind the sporting encounter. Australia and Japan pledging deeper cooperation on a plethora of areas, including energy security, defense and critical minerals. Prime Ministers Sanae Takaichi and Anthony Albanese held a leaders' summit in Canberra and signed a series of agreements as their nations reel from the fallout of the war on Iran. Roger Maynard is covering the story for CNA.
The significance of this meeting and the agreements signed by the Japanese and Australian Prime Ministers cannot be underestimated. While they marked the 50th anniversary of the basic treaty of friendship between the two nations, the talks revealed big plans for cooperation in the fields of critical minerals, energy security and defence. These three topics alone address some of the most vital challenges facing the world right now, and in particular Australia and Asia. Japan's Prime Minister admitted the closure of the Strait of Hormuz had been inflicting enormous impact on the Indo-Pacific, and she affirmed that Japan and Australia would closely communicate with each other with a sense of urgency. Prime Minister Takaichi said she was looking forward to working closely with Australia to achieve an updated, free and open Indo-Pacific. She described the meeting as highly productive and predicted increasingly close cooperation between Japan and Australia.
国際情勢が非常に厳しくて複雑になっている中、私は同志国連携の重要性を長年訴えてまいりました。
For his part, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said they had produced a range of ambitious outcomes that comprehensively elevated their special strategic partnership. Firstly, there was economic security, which would make them more resilient to economic shocks and uncertainty, enable them to further build trusted supply chains, and to accelerate development of critical technologies. He explained their joint statement on energy security reaffirmed their commitment to navigate the current energy crisis together and maintain open trade flows of essential goods, including liquid fuels and gas. Their joint statement on critical minerals elevated rare earths to a core pillar of their economic relationship, he insisted. Mr. Albanese also spoke of enhanced defence and security cooperation to support regional peace.
Our two countries have never been more strategically aligned. We work closely to advance our shared interests in a peaceful, stable and prosperous region, and I welcome Sana's commitment to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Clearly, both countries need each other at the moment, and the meeting between the two Prime Ministers will provide a significant springboard in developing that partnership. The energy crisis and the strategic uncertainties, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, are creating a sense of urgency which require trust between nations in this part of the world. Australia desperately wants a commitment to access some of Japan's refined oil stocks, while at the same time Japan needs Australia's coal and gas to power its own energy system. Then, of course, there's defence and how countries like Australia and Japan respond to a changing world order, strategic challenges which make strong defence ties between similarly aligned nations ever more important. Roger Maynard, CNA, Sydney.
Japan's outreach in the Indo-Pacific takes center stage, from supply chains in Vietnam to security ties in Australia. An expert joins us later this hour to break down what Ms. Takaichi's trip signals for regional strategy. Japan, meantime, is looking to boost defense ties here in Southeast Asia. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi is in Indonesia, where both countries have agreed to deepen cooperation in the industry and development of personnel. Indonesia's Defense Minister, Jeffrey Jamsodin, said that such cooperation is a strategic one to strengthen its domestic capabilities. There are also plans to boost knowledge transfer and expand cooperation in disaster response. Talks are set to conclude with the signing of a defense cooperation agreement. Now, the meeting follows an earlier round of talks in Bali yesterday. Mr. Koizumi heads to the Philippines tomorrow, where he will meet Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro. Iran warns of an attack on American forces if they entered the Strait of Hormuz after President Donald Trump announced what he called humanitarian efforts by the U.S. to free stranded ships in the key waterway. Now, Iran has reiterated that the strait's security remains under its control and safe passage must be coordinated with its armed forces. Now, Mr. Trump described the stranded ships as merely neutral and innocent bystanders, and that the U.S. Navy will guide them out safely, but cautioned any interference will be dealt with forcefully. A U.S. Central Command says it will support the operation, dubbed Project Freedom, with guided missile destroyers, more than 100 aircraft, and 15,000 service members. But it did not say how they would be deployed. The Wall Street Journal reported that no U.S. military vessels will be involved. Instead, they will involve countries, insurance companies, and shipping organizations who will receive information on avoiding mines. Well, Iran's parliamentary head of national security says that any American interference would violate the ceasefire. Ibrahim Azizi stressed that the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf will not be managed by what he described as Trump's delusional posts and warned of blame game scenarios. Diplomatic efforts remain in place despite an impasse in talks. Pakistan's foreign minister held a phone call with his Iranian counterpart last night to discuss the conflict and ways to push diplomacy forward. Iran's foreign ministry, meantime, says that Tehran is reviewing Washington's response to its latest proposal, though it pointed to, quote, unreasonable demands, complicating the path towards an end to the war. Tehran's 14-point plan includes guarantees against future attacks, pullout of U.S. forces from areas around Iran, and a so-called new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. State media reported Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister saying that, quote, the ball is now in the U.S. court to choose diplomacy or continue a confrontational approach. But both sides seem to remain far apart on one of the key sticking points, Iran's uranium enrichment. Tehran says there will be no nuclear negotiations before other issues are resolved. It wants to end the war within 30 days. But the U.S. has been insisting Iran commit to ending its nuclear program before halting the war, with Mr. Trump calling the issue a, quote, red line. A new stage in Beijing's pushback against American sanction enforcement. China has ordered its companies not to comply with U.S. sanctions on Chinese oil refiners following an in-depth assessment by the Chinese Commerce Ministry. Now, in its findings, Beijing reported that America's actions constituted, quote, improper extraterritorial application. Beijing says that the sanctions will not be recognized, enforced, or complied with. The ministry also described the sanctions as a violation of international law and basic norms of international relations. Now, the order released on Saturday marks Beijing's first use of a newly elected blocking statute. It's aimed at shielding Chinese firms from the extraterritorial reach of foreign sanctions. Analysts say that China's reaction will be an issue for the U.S., since the Chinese government will not allow the banks to stop providing credit to sanctioned entities. The U.S. last month imposed levies on Chinese entities and individuals it says were involved in trading Iranian fuel, emphasizing that the sanctions are part of action to disrupt Iran's oil trade. Tensions have been mounting in the lead up to President Trump's expected China trip later this month. Just last week, a U.S. regulator proposed to bar Chinese labs from testing electronic devices for use in the U.S., a move that garnered criticism from Beijing. The U.S. regulator also advanced a proposal to bar Chinese networks from operating data centers in the U.S. Even so, top Chinese and American trade officials have also held talks. Washington says that the officials discussed a possible board of trade to manage economic ties and streamline trade in non-sensitive goods. Coming up next on East Asia tonight. East Asia's equity markets are back at record highs, wiping out losses from the Iran war as a surge in AI stocks fuels a powerful rebound. Plus, oil prices edge up again as US-Iran deal remains elusive and as investors assess news of potential ship movement through the Strait of Hormuz. Hello there. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, it seems like no relief for oil prices. What's happening there? Because the U.S. did announce that it's starting this operation to aid all these stranded ships.
Yes, it did. There was temporary relief, but it didn't stay the case for long, with crude prices edging higher in Asian trade. Market watchers say the path for prices remains skewed to the upside as long as flows through the strait remains restricted. Oil prices edging higher as investors weigh President Trump's announcement of Project Freedom, aimed at improving flows through the Strait of Hormuz. The West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, is currently $106.15. That's up 4.3%, while the global marker, Brent crude, is currently $111.42, and that's up 3%. So far, buyers from Asia and elsewhere are turning to the U.S. to replace Gulf supply. That increased demand has made the U.S. once again the top exporter of crude as it helps plug the supply gap due to the blockage at the Strait of Hormuz. Now, while oil prices remained above $100 a barrel, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that energy prices should decline later this year. He said oil prices on the other side of the conflict are going to be much lower than they were last year. He's also defended Washington's actions against Iran, saying that its economic pressure on Iran is, quote, suffocating the regime. Now, despite this, Gulf energy exporters are showing that they are ready to raise supplies once the war stops. OPEC Plus agreed on a modest oil output hike for the month of June. It's the third such increase since the conflict began, but the move remains largely on paper as the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz restricts oil shipments from the Gulf. Meanwhile, the UAE's flagship oil company said that it's planning to spend some $55 billion on new projects over the next 2 years. The move comes days after it left OPEC, allowing it to produce as much or as little crude as it wants. Now, Brunei's crude exports hitting a 5-year high last month as Southeast Asian economies look beyond the Gulf for oil supplies. Shipping data from Kepler showing that the oil-rich country exported 105,000 barrels per day in the month of April. The shift comes as supply routes through the Strait of Hormuz remains largely blocked, more than 2 months after the U.S.-Iran war broke out. Thailand's imports from the UAE fell by more than half from February, partly offset by shipments from Brunei and Libya. Singapore's crude imports was down a sharp 61% in April versus February. It is also diversified quickly, with more than 60% of its crude and condensate imports now coming from the U.S. Meanwhile, Vietnam has also been hit hard, with imports from Kuwait nearly grinding to a halt. It has since turned to supplies, including Angola, Argentina, and the U.S. Asian currencies are in focus as the U.S. dollar edged lower as oil prices easing, and investors grappling with supply uncertainties at the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the weaker US dollar gave a slight boost to the Japanese yen following last week's sell-off and a suspected intervention by Tokyo. The Korean won, meantime, is holding steady against the greenback and the Australian dollar, surging this year to be the second best performer among the G10 peers. But analysts see that rally fading amid expectation that Australia's central bank may signal a slower pace of rate hikes in the policy horizon. Now, AI in Asia gaining ground after strong U.S. tech earnings last week. South Korea's Kospi hitting a fresh record high. It's also playing catch-up to the tech rally after returning from a holiday on Friday. The tech-heavy index has gained more than 60% this year. A Taiwan-weighted index also jumping 4% on the revival of the AI trade. Singapore's STI is in the green, while the Hang Seng Index is also getting a lift. Japan's markets closed for a public holiday. Hong Kong property stocks rallying today, boosting a gauge of developers as much as 2.7% in earlier trade. And that's after Morgan Stanley raised its forecast for home prices in the territory, as the city's property market showed signs of it exiting a years-long slump. Developer Henderson Land jumping more than 6%, while China Overseas Land and Investment is also up more than 2%. Other big movers in trade today are Korean memory chip makers Samsung and SK Hynix. Taiwan's TSMC, manufacturer of advanced AI chips, also jumping more than 6%. Top figures of what used to be one of Asia's largest hedge funds have pleaded not guilty to charges of insider trading in Hong Kong as the trial begins today. It is closely watched as a test of a crackdown on insider dealings amid a boom in the territory's stock market. Hong Kong securities regulator filed a case against Saganti Capital Management and its founder Simon Sadler and former trader Daniel LaRocca back in 2024, accusing them of insider trading of shares in fashion retailer Esprit Holdings ahead of a block trade in 2017. Now, prosecutors allege that the defendants sold Esprit shares after receiving advance information of a block sale from an employee at Bank of America Merrill Lynch's unit. The trial is set to last until the 8th of June, and the maximum sentence, if found guilty, will be 7 years. Now, Samsung Biologics says a strike by its union has cost the company about $102 million so far. The South Korean contract drug maker says the walkout has caused a partial disruption to production lines, though it adds the full financial impact is still unclear. About half of its nearly 3,000 employees have been on strike since April 28th. Now, management has offered a 6.2% pay rise, while the union is demanding 9.3% along with bonuses and other benefits. Now, both sides are set to resume talks today. The strike comes as unions at Samsung Electronics threatens an 18-day walkout later this month, raising wider concerns over labor unrest across parent Samsung Group. Despite the strike, Samsung Biologics shares price, though, have been relatively unchanged, closing up 1% higher today. Now, airlines have cut 2 million seats in the month of May, with jet fuel becoming more scarce. They're also grounded hundreds of thousands of flights as they consolidate their schedules to conserve fuel, given the oil supply disruptions because of the Middle East conflict. Now, total seats globally fell 130 million. International carriers have also been reshuffling their network given the impact of the fuel shortages, which is unevenly spread. Asia has taken much of the impact given it is more reliant on the fuel that has made from the oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Air China has cancelled a number of flights, trimming more than 480,000 for May, including a number of domestic connections. Other airlines, such as Japan Airlines, may be seeing increased demand to and from Europe, given passengers choosing not to transit in the Middle East, but higher fuel charges are pushing costs up. GEL estimates profit will fall some 20% for the financial year to March. A newly released Bain & Company report reviewing Southeast Asia's private equity shows that the market was already slowing last year with fewer deals and weaker exits. Now, the conflict in Iran disrupting oil flows is proving to be another headache for investors. Olivia Marzuki finds out more.
2025, which is the calendar year, was a slow year.
Exit is certainly an important thing that does keep investors up at night in Southeast Asia.
As of today, yes, there is a gap between bid and ask.
A look into Southeast Asia's private equity scene found stagnation in the market in 2025. Private equity is when investors buy companies, try to improve them, and later sell them for profit. Well, right now, that last step, selling or exiting, is proving the hardest. Bain & Co. says deal value fell 10% on year to about $14 billion across 84 transactions. The recovery remains uneven, with value concentrated in small number of large deals. Exits are still the biggest drag, with value falling 32% in 2025. PE firms mostly sold assets through trade sales, not IPOs. As they held assets for longer, older investments built up, making secondary sales a more important way to get cash back.
And when IPOs are difficult to do, then strategic buyers becomes even more desirable exit option. So that is certainly where investors in Southeast Asia are going to be looking, so exits to other financial sponsors, because there's certainly no shortage of capital that is waiting to be deployed.
A lot of corporates has been looking around the region. It's a market entry. It's a difficult market to navigate, especially for countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines. So the best way for them to get a market entry is to acquire or invest in a local business that's probably has been professionally run and invested by the professional investors to streamline governance, to streamline the business control processes, institutionalize the business.
Investor maybe wanted to exit, but at the same time, we don't see the exact offer that were expected in front. This is, I think, at a shifting point, though, as we can see with the interest rate getting a bit lower and regulated by the bank. So we may see some more transaction, but I think this is one of the main issues. It's really hard to compare Asia and Southeast Asia to what we have been used to see in America and Europe. It's a totally different type of market.
This year, investors are also watching the risk of energy disruption and oil price shock tied to the Middle East conflict. Still, against a tougher macro environment, some sectors are holding up. The artificial intelligence theme tops the chart, as well as the infrastructure supporting the AI expansion, such as data centers.
There's been a significant flow of capital into data centers. Malaysia is a material recipient of capital. Indonesia is important. Thailand is going to start to become important. Think about things like power. You think about things like cooling. Those are going to bring about their own set of ancillary opportunities.
There will be a lot more data, a lot more analytics can be done, understanding what the consumer wants. And AI can actually help to predict consumer patterns, consumption patterns, that will take advantage of data that is being collected.
I think as of today, it's really, really hard to assume that any business in the world can be waterproof at 100%. But anything that is alternative real estate, I think, stay extremely on top of the market. But obviously, you have more aggressive investors looking for alternative and real estate, such as the data center industrial.
So with investors still riding out the 2025 slowdown, they now have an oil shock and lingering trade tensions to contend with, while putting their money to work in the region's long-term growth engines.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, Japan and Australia agree to deepen cooperation on energy, defense, as well as critical minerals, as Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi meets her Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, in Canberra. We'll be speaking to an expert about what the Japanese Prime Minister's visit means for the region. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines you're following.
Present arms.
Japan and Australia lock in deals on energy, defense, and critical minerals as the two leaders look to tighten their Indo-Pacific partnership amid geopolitical uncertainties. Now, Iranian state media says 2 missiles hit a U.S. warship in the Strait of Hormuz after warning American forces to stay out of the waterway or face attack. And Washington backs William Lai's surprise visit to Eswatini, describing Taiwan as a trusted partner. China, however, reiterating the island poses a big risk to U.S.-China ties ahead of an expected summit between both presidents. A Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, has renewed her call to revise the country's constitution. The move would be the first ever amendment since it came into force in 1947. Now, she said that the country's supreme law must evolve with modern realities, but public opinion remains divided. Now, in a Constitution Day message yesterday, Ms. Takaichi vowed to push concrete amendments, promising to explain them clearly to the public. At the heart of the debate is Article 9, the cornerstone of Japan's post-war pacifist stance. Ms. Takaichi's Liberal Democratic Party is seeking a two-thirds parliamentary majority to trigger a national referendum. Supporters say changes are needed as regional tensions rise. But opposition is growing. Tens of thousands rallied across Japan yesterday to defend the constitution, invoking wartime memories and calling for the pacifist clause to be preserved. Meanwhile, Japan is strengthening security and economic ties abroad. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, as we've mentioned, met her Australian counterpart, Anthony Albanese, today, signing agreements in energy, critical minerals, and defense cooperation. And for more on the Japanese leader's Indo-Pacific trip, let's bring in Grant Newsham, a senior research fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. And let's not forget, he's also a retired U.S. Marine colonel who spent decades in the Indo-Pacific. So quite a fair bit to unpack here for us, Grant. First up, let's just start with what's beneath the headlines. This visit basically framed around energy and critical minerals, but how much of it is about trade on paper and how much of it is about deterrence in practice?
Well, it's about both of these. Takaichi understands very well that economic security is regular security. It combines with the so-called hard power. And so that was her previous job in the government. So they combined the two, and the Japanese don't really distinguish it. But for many years, the Japanese really were just an economic sort of provider to the region, but they didn't get much credit for that. And I think they're trying to catch up now and provide more of a military of security component to what they do. But it's all very much done with an eye towards the People's Republic of China, its expansion, its aggression. The Japanese don't talk much or explain themselves very well, but when they get these deals done, they're reducing dependency on the PRC, they're securing their supply chains, sources of energy, and this is all done with an eye towards Japan's national security.
And of course, Grant, the travel route here matters as well. Ms. Takaichi, she went to Vietnam first and then to Australia. I mean, that route, what does it tell us about Japan's bigger Indo-Pacific game plan?
Well, Japan's able to look at the entire map, and you look at them, and they're active from Tonga over to Sri Lanka, over to India, but they see Vietnam as a particular potential partner, almost a hedge against Chinese aggression, assertiveness, and they have a long history with Vietnam, where the Japanese are actually regarded by many Vietnamese as having helped them throw off the colonial yoke, and there is very good feelings for Japan in Vietnam, but at the same time, Vietnam's top leadership are very close to the Chinese Communist Party, although the public at large doesn't agree with that. But the Japanese, as I said, look at the entire map. So you look at Vietnam as strategic position, faces problems from Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, and Japan sees that as a natural partner, if not outright ally. And then Australia, of course, the Japanese have always had a special sort of spot for the Australians going back a long time. I recall in 2016, they tried to sell submarines to Australia. Those are articles of war. There's no other use for a submarine. So Japan has had its eye on Australia, Vietnam, and as I said, the rest of the Indo-Pacific region. They're not very good at explaining themselves, but if you look carefully, they have a thought-out strategy to try and get their influence, get a positioning throughout the region.
So, Grant, the labels here are somewhat careful, but the substance seems to be growing. What I'm talking about is Japan and Australia. They stopped short of calling this a formal alliance. Instead, they use the term quasi-alliance. But we're talking about warships here, critical minerals, supply chains, all of that now tied together. How close is this relationship becoming in practice?
Well, I think there's a real limit to it. And I'd say that is mostly because Australia is trying to sort of play both sides, be very accommodating to the PRC, particularly to sell a lot of things to China. Australia sees its economy as very heavily dependent on the PRC. At the same time, there's a certain wariness on the part of the Australians, but the Japanese would like to get very, very close to the Australians. And not least, once again, there's a military component, but the rare earth minerals is also a huge part of this. And additionally, energy supplies that flow both ways. So the Japanese, I think, want the relationship with the Australians more perhaps than the Australians do, despite what Australia says, because you simply cannot really have both. If you're in Canberra, you've got to effectively choose one side or the other. You don't have to say it publicly, but the administrations in Australia, in Canberra, they have been perhaps too accommodating of the PRC, and the PRC has shown what they think of that when they send their military down around Australia into the Southwest Pacific, don't tell the Australians about it, and there very much is sort of a thumbing their nose towards the Australians when the Chinese do this. So the Australians haven't quite figured things out, one might say, but it's nonetheless, that's the nature of foreign affairs and relationships, but the Australia-Japan relationship is potentially a very good one, and it didn't just spring out of the ground recently. This has been going on for at least 15 years and gradually expanding and building.
Well, let's talk a little bit more from Beijing's perspective. I mean, they're looking on, this visit, for instance. How worrying is it, the combination of tighter Australia-Japan defense ties and supply chains that would be harder for China to squeeze? I mean, would that be Beijing's concern?
Oh, definitely. Anytime that Beijing's intended victims get together to defend themselves, the Chinese communists really don't like it. And they say that. You can tell from their response and their specific language. It's not just the Japanese and the Australians. There's other countries, the Philippines, India, even some of the Southeast Asian countries, when they get together to cooperate both militarily and particularly economically, so that they create an alternative to dependence on the PRC. That this is something that the Chinese really don't like. And when the Americans are in the mix, solidly tied in with these free nations, this gives Beijing, gives the Chinese communists a lot of concern. And you can always tell from their reaction how effective something is. If they complain about it, it's probably something that you're doing right and should probably do more of.
All right, many thanks for unpacking why this visit is more than mere handshakes. Thanks so very much, Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Now, in other news, the U.S. has called Taiwan a trusted and capable partner after President William Lai made a surprise visit to Eswatini over the weekend. And Washington says that Taipei's relationship with the African nation provides, quote, significant benefits, and that such trips are routine and should not be politicized. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory and has condemned the trip, warning that Taiwan remains the, quote, biggest point of risk for U.S.-China ties. The diplomatic friction comes just weeks before a planned summit between U.S. and Chinese leaders in Beijing. Now, Eswatini is one of Taiwan's few remaining diplomatic allies. Both sides signed a new customs and trade agreement. Eswatini's king has reaffirmed his unwavering support for Taiwan's place on a global stage. Now, a special counsel team in South Korea says it uncovered early signs of martial law planning months before former President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration in December 2024. The team has been probing allegations linked to Yoon's failed bid. Investigators say the Defense Counterintelligence Command had been preparing for the move since the first half of 2024, but details remain unclear. One piece of evidence, though, A notebook belonging to a former intelligence chief, No Sang-wan, however, outlined planned military appointments. Those plans were later reflected in personnel changes in October 2023. The Defense Counterintelligence Command has been accused of playing a role on the night of the martial law declaration, including attempting to deploy troops to the National Assembly and the election watchdog. Basically, the findings support earlier claims that the martial law bid was not a last-minute one. Yoon was impeached weeks after the declaration and removed from office by the Constitutional Court soon after. In February, a court sentenced Yoon to life in prison, but ruled the decision to impose martial law came just 2 days before it happened. Now, that ruling is now under appeal, with prosecutors arguing the move was planned, not sudden. Singapore and New Zealand have signed a new trade deal to keep essential goods moving during crises. Described as a world's first, it's a legally binding agreement between the two countries that covers items like food, fuel, and healthcare supplies. Both sides have committed to not impose export restrictions and work together to keep goods flowing during disruptions. The signing was witnessed by the prime ministers of both countries. CNA's Aslam Shah tells us more about what makes the agreement and its significance.
This agreement ensures that essential goods continue to flow between the two countries, even during times of disruptions, which is the current period that both countries are facing, with energy disruptions and global supply chain disruptions leading from the Middle East conflict. Now, Singapore has been working on a similar type of agreement with other countries, but what makes this a world first is that it's the first time it's being signed, making it legally binding, and countries are committed to actually go through with it beyond just support and broad statements. Now, for the types of goods that are involved here include healthcare products, food and fuel supplies. Now, of course, for Singapore as a major refinery hub, New Zealand depends on Singapore for processed fuel. About 1/3 of its supply comes from Singapore, and this will power its food industry, which in turn Singapore depends on essential supplies, daily food products like eggs, milk, meats and fruits. This is where Singapore depends on New Zealand. So there is a bilateral cooperation and agreement to ensure that there's no disruption in the flow of this, even during times of crisis. Beyond this, Singapore is also looking to further collaborate on other areas and other essential goods, and this especially for this particular deal is not exclusive to just Singapore and New Zealand. They are open to welcoming other countries to have similar deals as well.
It is between us, but it's not exclusive. It's not meant to be exclusive. We welcome other countries to join us, and if they are able to meet the same standards, then it will start to expand a network of trusted partners who can provide similar assurances to one another.
As difficult and as choppy as the waters are out there in the globe at the moment, and I appreciate that people feel anxious about that change that is happening right now, it hasn't yet been determined, and I think countries like New Zealand and Singapore, while we're small, are really important. We have values and interests. We may not have power, but the way we have power and influence is by working together in the way that you've seen us increasingly do so.
Earlier, both Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his New Zealand counterpart, Christopher Luxon, were at the inaugural Singapore-New Zealand Leadership Forum, which brings together senior government and business leaders to strengthen economic cooperation. And that's where Mr. Wong called for wider collaboration with New Zealand beyond bilateral ties. And this includes opportunities in the digital and green economies, as well as with ASEAN. Mr. Wong also stressed the importance of working with trusted partners like New Zealand amid growing global uncertainties. He highlighted growth potential in ASEAN and the need for businesses to adapt and collaborate more closely.
We are now dealing with disruption from the Middle East crisis, and these episodes remind us that perhaps such shocks are no longer one-off. They are becoming part of the new normal in our business environment. So we cannot assume that markets will always function as before. We have to diversify, de-risk, and build resilience into our systems. Governments have to do so. I'm sure businesses have to do this too as part of your business continuity plans.
Prime Minister Wong has promised Singapore will not be a passive bystander when the rules-based order is threatened. It's an instinct that we are very, very aligned on. And I often encourage Kiwis that New Zealand must be a participant, not a spectator, in these issues. Singapore and New Zealand may not be superpowers, but small states enjoy unique powers. We bring the discipline of clarity, of focus on issues that matter to us. And when the system is fraying, it's countries like Singapore and New Zealand who come together to stand behind it.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, a rare sports exchange between war-divided rivals. A North Korean women's football team prepares to head south for a semi-final this month. Return trips picking up in China as a 5-day May Day holiday nears its end. Authorities say the national railway network is expected to handle more than 20 million passengers. South Korea has launched its next-generation Earth observation satellite, which has successfully entered low Earth orbit. That's as Seoul seeks to bolster its own satellite development capabilities. Now, the satellite, called the Compact Advanced Satellite, or CAS-502, was launched aboard SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket from a space base in California yesterday. Korea Aerospace Administration said that key components of the satellite's platform and payload were developed with homegrown technology. The mid-sized 500-kilogram class satellite is developed for agricultural observation and will assist with disaster management. The satellite had originally been scheduled to launch on a Russian rocket in 2022, but was delayed due to the war on Ukraine. A North Korean women's football club is set for a rare visit to the south this month. Naegoyeong Women's FC will face Suwon FC Women on the 20th of May in the South Korean city of Suwon for the semi-final of the AFC Women's Champions League. Pyongyang has submitted a 39-member delegation list that includes 27 players and a dozen staff. This will be the first time North Korean athletes enter South Korea since December 2018, following the Olympic thaw earlier that year. The winner will face either Melbourne City or Tokyo Verdy Belitsa in the final, also in Suwon, on 23rd of May. Now, earlier, my colleague Paul Seung spoke to CNA's Grace Shin, who broke down the significance of this rare trip to the south.
Well, this is more than just a women's football match because it carries a lot more political weight than expected. North Korea's Naegoyeong Women's FC, as you mentioned, is scheduled to play against South Korean Suwon FC Women on May 20th at Suwon Sports Complex in the semifinal of the AFC Women's Champions League. And it's one of the two semifinals that will be going on in the South Korean city alongside Melbourne City against Tokyo Verdy Belitsa. And the match here is very rare because North Korean athletes almost never compete on South Korean soil these days. And this is not a national team at a big multi-sport event. It's actually a North Korean football club crossing into South Korea for an official Asian club competition. So that makes it politically sensitive, even if the match itself is being organized through football channels.
Now, when was the last time we saw something like that?
If we're talking about North Korea football teams playing in South Korea, the most recent precedent is the North Korean women's national football team at the 2014 Incheon Asian Games. North Korea won gold in the tournament after beating Japan 3-1 in the final. And if we narrow it even further to a North Korean football club, this is much rarer. A national team represents the country. A club team represents a specific football club. So Naegoyeong is not North Korea's national team. It's a club side playing in an Asian club competition. So that's why this visit can stand out. North Korean national teams have appeared in South Korea before, but a North Korean club to side cross into South Korea for an official competition is far more unusual.
So could we view this as sports diplomacy, which can lead to something bigger, perhaps?
I think reading it as a diplomatic breakthrough would be a bit too premature and generous, if I must say, because what's more interesting is that this match may actually reinforce the new reality that has been on the peninsula. That's not reunification, but two separate states managing contact through a third-party rule. So North Korea describes the South as a hostile state, not a reunification partner. And South Korea, though under President Lee Jae-myung has been trying to mend ties with the North, has been also taking a bit of a stance of peaceful coexistence distance rather than immediate reunification. So this match fits that pattern. It's not being handled as a warm inter-Korean exchange. Just today, Seoul's Unification Ministry mentioned they drew a clear line saying it's an international sporting event. And the North Korean delegation was passed through the AFC, meaning that there was no direct north-south communication lines open just because the match was announced. And it suggests that both sides can still occupy the same space. In this case, it's a field, but only through a neutral framework like the AFC. So it's a bit too premature to call it a thaw for sure. If anything, it shows how far the relationship between the two Koreas have shifted. The two Koreas are not meeting as one people trying to reunify. Instead, they are treating each other as separate entities, and they can interact when an outside institution takes place. So the bottom line would be football doesn't bring the two Koreas together per se, but it's that they can still share a pitch, but only as two separate sides.
Return trips in China picking up pace as the country's 5-day May Day holiday nears its end. Authorities say the national railway network is expected to handle at least 20 million passengers and plans to add more than 1,600 passenger trains. Road and air traffic are also expected to rise. Authorities say more than 297 million inter-regional passenger trips were recorded nationwide on Saturday. That's up 1.7% from the same day last year. Police in Guangzhou have deployed smart tech to enhance public safety during the busy holiday period. A humanoid police officer, for instance, dressed in a police safety vest, walked alongside officers on patrol and also performed martial arts moves. Officers also use self-balancing scooters to swiftly navigate parks and reach people in need of help. While drones were deployed to conduct aerial patrols. The May Day holiday is one of China's busiest travel periods of the year, with millions traveling domestically every year. Now, some headlines are from media outlets in East Asia. Let's check out South China Morning Post, reporting ultra-cheap Hong Kong tour packages are still operating despite tighter regulations. Now, these packages rely on commissions and encouraged mainland Chinese visitors to spend more at designated stops. Well, the practice is under scrutiny after license revocations over suspected coerced shopping, raising concerns during the ongoing Labor Day Golden Week holiday. Now, NHK says tourists are returning to a wildfire-hit town in northeastern Japan's Iwate Prefecture after authorities declared the blaze contained. Restaurants in Otsuchi town are reopening and drawing crowds as locals hope that tourism will help recovery. A Yonhap news agency says that South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is urging careful deliberation and public input over a proposed special probe into allegations he was charged based on, quote, fabricated evidence under the previous administration. The ruling party backs the investigation, while opposition lawmakers warn that it could be used to clear him of ongoing cases. And that's all the time we've got for you on East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can also find us on our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.